Hello and welcome to today's webinar, which is the first of a series of webinars on Metaverse. I'm Ali Emdad, Associate Dean and Director of the National FinTech Center at Morgan State University. I also want to thank the outstanding panelists, Merav Ozair, Raphael Brown, and Sandy Aggarwal, who spent many hours with us over the past several weeks to plan and arrange this series of informative webinars. In the first one, we will review the vision, history, orientation, and components of Metaverse. And then in the future sessions, we will have discussions on identity, avatars, privacy, rights, ethics, play, education, games, sports, simulation, and social media. And then we move on to commerce, work, legal aspects, and tools, IP, and also finance. So without further ado, I would request my colleague who was instrumental in organizing this webinar, Tynisa Walters Brown, to introduce our panelists. Tynisa?
Thank you, Dr. Emdad. First, I would like to introduce Mr. Sandy Aggarwal. Sandy Aggarwal is a technology leader with expertise in systems development, enterprise and architecture and systems integration, and product and program management. He has many years of expertise in rolling out bank technology platforms such as trading systems, reference data management, customer regulatory reporting, cash management, and payments. Sandy is also actively involved in the fintech and blockchain space via open source community projects with Hyperledger in the financial services and gaming special interest groups, and is currently working on developing solutions to reduce DLT friction in fintech and games. Our next panelist, Mr. Raphael Brown, is a game designer, game developer, XR technologist, and studio head. He is a 25-year veteran of the game industry who traces his roots to Looking Glass and seminal FPS Thief. He saw this generation of virtual reality start on John Carmack's desk 11 years ago while working on the open world FPS Rage. Raphael loves building virtual worlds. He has been dreaming of the metaverse since watching the Tron in the theaters as a kid and reading Neuromancer a couple years later. During the pandemic, he founded Symbol Zero, which builds games, virtual worlds, virtual concerts, and cloud platforms. Symbol Zero is Roblox's virtual concert partner, having built the Lil Nas X virtual concert experience, the second largest virtual concert in history, and many other concerts for Sony Music and Warner Music and Roblox. Last but not least, I would like to introduce Dr. Merav Ozair. She is a global leading expert on blockchain and cryptocurrency with a background of data scientist and quant strategist. Currently, Dr. Ozair applies her unique expertise to researching and investigating distributed ledger technology and blockchain ecosystems, digital assets, crypto markets, and specifically decentralized finance, DeFi, and non-fungible tokens, NFTs. She has been developing innovative methodologies to evaluate digital assets, crypto markets, including cryptocurrency indexes, valuation and risk metrics, ratings and tokenized products, and of particular focus, researching various DLTs and DeFi solutions, including decentralized identity and decentralized trust, privacy, and security, mainly through consensus mechanism protocols and governance, including decentralized autonomous organizations, DOAs, of the platform application. Dr. Ozair is a fintech professor at Rutgers Business School. At RBS, she has developed and teaches courses on blockchain and digital assets for both undergrads and graduate level, and is the Research Director of RBS Blockchain Hub. She serves as an advisor and researcher at the Rutgers Blockchain and FinTech Collaboratory and is affiliated professor at Rutgers Law School, focusing on DeFi. Without further ado, I would like to pass it over to Dr. Ozair. We're going to unmute you.
Yeah. So good afternoon, everyone. If you are based in the eastern side, and if you are in the west side, probably that's a good morning to you. So I guess what I'm going to start with is a little bit of a brief introduction of, I don't know, 8-10 minutes to introduction of some definitions of, just so you have an understanding of what is the metaverse, Web3, and how everything fits in. So I'm going to go through that quickly, and then I'll give the stage to my esteemed panelist here. So let me share my screen and go over like a brief, overview so you understand where everything fits. Let me see if I can share my screen. Yeah, okay. So let me do that very quickly. Let's see, I'll share my screen. Okay. So I hope everyone sees my screen. Can you see my screen? Okay. So yeah, so we are basically now in our first seminars, not seminars, sorry, webinars that we're doing in on the metaverse. So we have to start, first of all, where everything fits and what does it mean, the metaverse. So I like to start with a very broad overview, macro overview of where everything fits. And if you think about the metaverse, I mean, people now think about all the hardware, like the VR, the virtual reality, the augmented reality, the goggles and all of that. But, but this is not the only thing. That's probably what people perceive, because that's what they see probably in, I don't know, kind of science fiction movies. And that's kind of like people having their mindset. But in any event, the metaverse, in order for that to really function and become what it's supposed to be, what we envision, then there's a lot of things that has to come together. And not just, the VR and the AR, which is virtual reality and augmented realities, but a lot of other technologies like we're talking about, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, and of course, blockchain. And this is, comes with Web3. So in order to put things in the right context, and of course, with blockchain, we have all of those things, where people already, talk about, how NFTs, relates, to the metaverse. And you probably heard about Decentraland, maybe yes and no, but, it's all about, each and every parcel is basically NFTs. It's how we authenticate that. Talking about transaction, how you're going to make transaction in the virtual world, you need virtual money. And this is, talking about the transaction that will, have like decentralized finance. And of course, there are all kinds of issues that we're going to talk about that relate to the security and the privacy of the metaverse, and how it will be governed, maybe to go through a decentralized autonomous organization. And there's also many questions about interoperability, which means, how all these virtual spaces will interoperate with each other. Are they, because each and every one of them will be in a silo, but, in our life, we know that we like to move and interact between different spaces. This is how we used to in our physical life. So, in fact, I wrote about, I have articles you can find on my website even, and I'm sure that it was shared with you, all kinds of articles that I've written about each and every topic here. But first and foremost, I would like to explain more, what is the metaverse and what is Web3, because there's a little bit of a misconception. Many times, the metaverse and Web3 are being used interchangeably, but they're not the same. As you can see, I didn't put them as one. So let's look at what does it mean. And in fact, Web3 is more connected to the blockchain, and blockchain within the metaverse. So let's understand first about what's, how to think about and what exactly is the metaverse and what exactly is Web3. So this is just, a very broad bird overview of where everything comes together. So let's start with what is Web3. So Web3, broadly speaking, Web3 is the evolution of Web2, meaning the internet that we know today, what we're using right now, right? We have this meeting on Zoom. And what is Zoom if not basically, what we're talking about? This is our internet. This is our Web3 type of internet. But it is a centralized internet, right? Because it is owned and controlled by all kinds of centralized company. And the move to Web3 is basically a move from centralized internet to a decentralized peer-to-peer internet, where no one entity claims control. So it's not controlled by one entity, like one company, whether it's Meta, formerly Facebook, or the Google, or the Apple, any of those, big technology companies, but rather it is decentralized peer-to-peer. So more specifically, the concept is basically the next generation of the internet. So it's the evolution, from, what we have now to something that is more decentralized. So it's how we're thinking now. Now we kind of the idea is basically to give the control or the ownership to the users rather than to the centralized companies who own, whatever the data and everything else. So the control now of the creation of any content, any digital assets will be of the users. So unlike, in Web 2, when all these centralized companies, and you probably heard about the, this Cambridge Analytica incident with Facebook, that they took the users, information and sold it to, they can sell it, to marketers and everything else. Because why? Because the internet now, in order for us to tap into the internet, we have to go through those centralized companies because they provide this service. But if it is decentralized and it's not owned by anybody, there's no one entity that claims control, then basically that is how we can create the right protocol that this data will be controlled and owned by the users. And the users that create the content, they own their content, they control it, and they have the ability to monetize it through the implementation of blockchain technology. Now, and this is the relation to blockchain technology, how that come to play within all this ecosystem, including the metaverse. So let me just give you a brief understanding of what is blockchain if you haven't already taken a course in blockchain. But if you haven't, then just very briefly. So what is blockchain? When we think about blockchain, then most simplicitly, people think about, blockchain is a ledger. Yes, it's a ledger, but it's not really like a ledger like, like Excel. It's not even, a more sophisticated one like, the SQL, like what we have with so it's not even that. It's much more complex, So I'm saying that yes, it's a ledger, but it's not. I mean, it's the data structure and all of that. It's much more complex, but you can definitely and this is what providers and also what I do is taking this information and putting it in a more something that is easy to read. So yes, it's a ledger in the sense that it records every transaction, everything that is recorded. But it's not just a simple ledger. This is an immutable ledger. What does it mean, immutable ledger? It's meaning that everything is recorded, unlike with Excel or even SQL. It is something that cannot be changed. Once it is recorded, it stays there forever. You cannot change it. You cannot alter it. You cannot come and delete it. Whatever, if you want to make any change, and you have to create like a counter, transaction. If you want this transaction to, you say, I didn't mean to do this, so you have to create like a counter transaction, but that's not always feasible. So there's, other, issues that relate, to and that's what, people are trying to understand how that can evolve. And I know that there are a lot of coaches that are working on that, but that's for a different a different day and a different topic and a different webinar probably. But just so you understand what we mean about blockchain and the concept of ledger. At the core, it is a decentralized ledger, meaning that everyone has a copy and everyone have access to this ledger. Again, as long as you have internet connection, it doesn't matter whether you are, everyone around the globe, whether you are on the top of the Himalaya or selling on a boat to Alaska, it doesn't matter where you are. As long as you have internet connection, you can tap into this ledger, this blockchain, and you can have a copy, you can see everything is inside, and you can even engage in the validation. That's what you're talking about, let's say, the validators. So this is why I said it is cross-border. So in just, briefly, because conscious of the time that we have here. So if I summarize, what are the main features of a blockchain, it is centralized, it is mutable, there's no central authority, it is trustless, meaning there's no intermediaries, and the way that we achieve this trustlessness is through this validation mechanism, which is not, again, I'm not going to go too much into that. It is anonymous, but I would like to call it semi-anonymous, pseudo-anonymous. And pseudo-anonymous is because you see all the transactions, but you do not know, the right identity of this address of the account. Like it sounds like, if you go to a bank account, we said ledger, right? In a bank account ledger, you have the account and you have the information of all of the identity of this account, right? Whether it's social security, and you have and all the, even maybe a name, an address, and all of that. You don't know that when you're looking at, information that comes from the blockchain, because this information is basically, all what you have is a hash, meaning some kind of a number. You can call it, for the sake of simplicity, like the ID of the account. But other than that, you don't know who that person or persons is, and you don't know anything. So it's, yes, everything is transparent, but the identity. But again, I can tell you, and I'm doing my own analysis now. I'm working on developing a product which does all kinds of tracing and mapping. I don't want to go too much into that, but it is possible even to identify those. So not going too much into that, but it's cross-border, peer-to-peer system, and the way that we might think about it is a democratic system run by the people for the people. And this is in fact how it was first launched. The Bitcoin, blockchain, which people kind of forgotten what that means. This is how everything basically kickstarted, with this concept of for the people, by the people. But that's for, again, a different day, a different webinar. So a little bit about what is the metaverse. I already mentioned that a little bit. So the metaverse is basically a virtual space, and this virtual space will merge and integrate in our lives. Like the idea is that it will integrate to any aspect of our life. When we're talking, whether we socializing, working, entertainment, learning, education, it's like it will be everywhere. I mean, even Bill Gates is already talking that in 5 years from now we're going to work in the metaverse. I don't know if this is feasible, 5 years, but the idea is that we can do a lot of things. I mean, everything that we have in our physical world we can do in the virtual world, and of course we can engage with people from not only in our community but all over the world. But that's that's a big concept, and big idea. And something that we shouldn't forget is that this big, grand concept is not a complete reality yet. Yeah, people are saying, oh, but there's a concept in the metaverse, or even there was a standard, a bank, a Spanish bank, did awarded some for their fintech I think competition, did something in the metaverse, yeah, because they have, I think, a partial launch in the central end. But again, it's not exactly the metaverse that we super envision. It's still not there yet, but but people are using this terminology, so you have to understand that the big concept of what we kind of envision sci-fi movies is not there yet. So this 3D immersive world that we're talking about, that's what it's supposed to be. We're not really there yet. It will be, as I said, a combination of a lot of technologies, from virtual reality to augmented reality to mixed reality to gaming, cryptocurrency, social media, and all this, and artificial intelligence, Internet of Things. So a lot of technology will be coming together to create this. So in other words, is metaverse is basically a way to think about it, that when the internet, transformed from 2D, that's what we have right now in Zoom, in a 3D. Suppose that now, if we have this really, this, vision of this reality will come to fruition, then we're gonna have this webinar in a 3D type of thing, like as if we're sitting in a room, in a conference room, or a big hall, a lecture hall, and we having this webinar. So that's how we kind of envision that in this virtual world. So instead of browsing or interacting in the 2D, each and every screen can become this 3-dimensional one, and users can walk around inside the page and interact with other users' avatar and all of those things. In fact, what we are just doing right now, which is 2D, we can be like in a 3D type of thing, as I mentioned. And now I will end with basically the relationship between the metaverse and Web3, which I started with because there's a lot of misconception, and sometimes people use that interchangeably. So the way you can think about it, the metaverse can be either centralized, owned by Meta, which is formerly Facebook, which is the same, basically Zuckerberg is saying, oh, I'm gonna rule the world, so to speak, and I have Meta, and everyone is going to interact in our metaverse. Or it could be decentralized. So if the user's ownership is prioritized, if we really believe that the user's ownership is a priority, then it is important for us to implement the metaverse in a decentralized way. And in this way, we can achieve, and this can be achieved by the set of rules and guidelines of the Web3, and which will provide us, it gives, the ownership, so the users that creates the content, they will own it, they will control it, and they will be able to monetize it. So this is my part of this webinar, and now I will give it back to Professor Emdad to take us to the next panelist. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Merav.
I'll stop sharing.
Yes, I think at this point, I think we should have Sandy take the stage and present some additional perspectives on metaverse. Then we can continue.
Well, absolutely. First of all, can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Very good, thank you. So I think, well, just as a quick sidebar, we did have, we were supposed to have another person speak at this point in time, but I'm going to continue from here. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So give me a second. Sorry, give me one moment. Okay, are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, I think it's coming up a little off. Give me one quick second. My apologies. Give me one moment, please. Okay. Are you able to see my screen here?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Let me just start from here. So I'm actually going to go into some of the building blocks. So first of all, hello, everybody. This is Sandy Aggarwal, and I'll actually just continue from the point where Dr. Ozair just kind of laid out a brief introduction to what the core definition of metaverse is and how we can think about metaverse being slightly different from just Web3 and blockchains. So let me just continue from here, and you can let me know if you can see my screen. Okay, so when we talk about the different building blocks of the metaverse, it's important to understand that we can differentiate the metaverse from just the game devices or just the underlying blockchain or the game or the Web3 engine. So we're going to be covering a bunch of topics here, but again, this is supposed to be just a quick orientation session. So we're not really going to go into too much details of any of these things. We'll purely just touch upon these different points here, and then in the subsequent sessions, we're going to have more details about each one of these subtopics. So the listing you see here is basically what are all the different components that actually really make up the metaverse. So we have, I'm actually going to go to the next slide, which shows like a bunch of different things. Of course, we're all familiar with different AR, VR, MR devices. Obviously, I think some of the most popular ones being MetaQuest or Oculus, which is part of the Meta or the VR department from Meta, which is Facebook. And you have Microsoft HoloLens, which is one of the most popular AR/MR devices. It's not commercially, or it's actually it's not really used by on a consumer basis yet, but it's more commercial usage. And of course, you have Valve Index being another VR device. But the reason I bring this up is that, like actually Dr. Ozair mentioned in her opening remarks, that there's a lot of confusion when people think about metaverse. The first image that comes into their mind is basically pretty much something like what you see here. It is somebody just having a strapped-on device and they can just get into the metaverse. But the metaverse is much more than just strapping on a device and much more just a game or the underlying Web3 engine. So the way I think about the different building blocks of the metaverse, basically, I like to divvy them up in infrastructural or core hardware components. And I'm going to come back to this slide in a second. And the applications and software, the bridging components that actually kind of glue things together. And finally, the centralized versus decentralized debate for the metaverse. And we're going to go and take some specific example as to which we'll go into after this slide. But let me just come back in here for a second there. So when we talk about the infrastructural core hardware components, this is where the devices, all the core devices, these are the machine to human interface, which is necessary to experience the virtual worlds. Now, however, these devices we still have today are not commercially and then practically useful. Basically, I say commercially viable in the sense that they're not something just like you can go buy a cell phone. It took a good 10 or 20, or in fact, say more than 20 years before cell phones came to the point, or the mobile devices came to the point they could be practically useful, where you can use them for more than just as your pages or basically they will not like have a bond of break. So it has to, any of these devices have to become lighter weight, they have to become non-intrusive. nobody can expect to stay in the metaverse for hours and hours by strapping on a multi-pound device on their head and being in there for many hours. Game engines and virtual worlds. Now, I believe it's a pretty commonly agreed upon concept that while Metaverse is not just gaming, but Metaverse will definitely start with gaming first. And what we mean by that is basically is the initial focus, most likely, of course, there's no Metaverse yet. We can't really call some websites Metaverse yet. But whatever the new version, the initial version of Metaverse comes in, that will be most likely some immersive gaming in virtual worlds, as Dr. Ozair was also mentioning earlier. And that's going to be followed by communities and business/work. Now, this is where the game engines, whether that's Unreal or Unity, of course, the two most popular ones, and of course, there's Amazon coming in there, there's CryEngine, and then, of course, there's multiple proprietary ones from Activision and Steam, which they have for all their own games, but only from the biggest of the studios or the biggest of the game developers. So there's a whole bunch of different game engines, which are going to be the crucial elements in creating these virtual worlds. And if you just go down the list here, so obviously the computing power. As we know right now, the computing power we have on our devices or on our cell phones or mobile devices, or even the VR and the AR devices, is enough to get us intrigued, is enough to basically give us a good glimpse into what it could be if you have to get into a virtual environment. But it's definitely not enough to have an always-on virtual world where you can just be in there with multiple, or I would say hundreds or even thousands of concurrent users. We do have some, obviously, that we have the MMORPGs, which are the massively multiple online RPG games or other kind of games, but none of those are fully immersive and none of those are fully always-on kind of environment. Now, obviously, in this list here, we have networking and bandwidth. So this becomes one of the most critical things, because whenever we talk about being an immersive environment, you cannot have an immersive environment unless you have the bandwidth. So even if you're just trying to download a game today, and if you're playing something on the cloud game, you cannot expect to have a completely latency-free game if you don't really have very high bandwidth and then high Wi-Fi speeds and all that. So this is where your bandwidth, in terms of the how much, whether it's 100 Mbps or it's 1 gigabyte speed, you can enjoy, or in some of the places you got to be able to do with a much higher latency. So there are certain games, for example, I think this is something I like to dive in a little more, is like, if you are thinking about being in the metaverse, and if you, for example, if you are thinking about even having a racing car game over there, you cannot adequately enjoy the game if you have anything less than 60 frames per second. And most of the newer games and most of the newer virtual worlds are expecting higher latency than that, or basically I say lower latency than that, and higher speeds to really make a meaningful impact on the user experience. And so essentially networking, which includes bandwidth and latency, becomes one of the core components of the core infrastructural aspects of the metaverse. And of course, then we have the data storage, because even though we just download some basic games, we download some basic virtual experiences, you need to have tons and tons of space on your hard drives. And then, of course, if you're talking about something like, let's take an example, like say Microsoft Flight Simulator, which needs to basically have a much more granular level of details for everything that you're trying to render. You cannot simply have just a few hundred gigabytes. This goes into much more than that. Literally goes into petabytes, and then the question begins: who really has the capability or the capacity to really have that kind of data on their local devices? Now, of course, you can have this kind of data on some cloud infrastructure, but then that's where the networking comes back into the picture as to, can you afford to render really high quality virtual worlds without introducing a lot of delay and without really going high in your FPS limits. Basically, you cannot reduce the frame per second if you have to really deliver that kind of content to the end user's device. Now, once we have gone over the core components, we'd like to go into the applications and the software that really do the bridging. And this is where a whole bunch of other things come to play, which include the payment systems. And the reason I even bring this up here as one of the first things is because anytime we talk about whether it's the game systems, whether it's the any sort of a virtual world, as anybody might have done at any level of gaming, they will know that you need to have you need to engage with the gaming ecosystem. You need to engage with the other people playing the games, and all those will require some sort of payment systems. They'll require some sort of a commerce, whether we call that the e-commerce or the re-commerce, whatever that, or even the m-commerce, whatever that comes to be known as. There will have to be some sort of mechanism to establish payments between the players and the participants, and it will have to be in such a way that it's not exploitative, and also in such a way that, of course, you cannot have a currency which is $1 today and then $100 tomorrow, because that's not something which is either going to be useful for the regular players, and B, nobody would be able to basically keep up with that kind of fluctuation in the actual metaverse. So, and of course, you have these social networks to be able to form communities between you know, like whether you're forming a community within your own virtual world or you're forming a community across virtual worlds. There will have to be social networks. And again, this is also debatable as to whether you want to have the social networks, which are an extension or something like today, whether there's Discord or Twitter or something else, or there's a social network which is completely decentralized, which is a big conversation going on, and who really gets to have the ownership of data on those social networks. So like Dr. Ozair mentioned, there are no more happenings like Cambridge Analytica, where somebody can just take your data and just sell it out to somebody else. So now, for all these things to work, this is where the interoperability and of the systems and processes comes and becomes a big central thing in this whole thing. Now, when we talk about the interoperable aspects, we have to keep in mind that it has to be not only within a given virtual world, but also across the virtual worlds. So just to give an example, basically, let's say, again, in the context of gaming, you can have a game like, say, Second Life, or you can have people who are on Roblox or Fortnite or somebody else. Now, are these people able to, you know, basically exchange assets with each other? And are they able to communicate with each other, not just via regular text, but basically within the metaverse? So the concept of interoperability is much more extensive, is very debatable, because the very core premise of the typical Web3 mindset is that, oh, you can take a given asset from a given game and you can basically just use that in another game. But as we all know, that's not something you can do that easily. Any given digital asset from a given virtual world or a given game is not something we can use easily, just ship it across to another game or another virtual world and use without consequences. There's many layers of complexity over there, which has to be resolved. And basically, I'm just going to make sure, just check on the things. There's many layers of complexity, including legal, including how you really like how one virtual world or one given game really understands the details of that specific asset. So you cannot really basically just take a scan or even a character from a given game and just make it work in another game or another virtual world. So unless all those standards have been established, but again, then if you just establish a whole bunch of standards where everybody basically has to follow the same standards, then you essentially end up losing the uniqueness of all the virtual worlds, and then you all you have is basically a plain vanilla standardized you know, kind of like a cookie cutter sort of thing, where there's no distinction between one virtual world versus the other one. So basically, in a sense, there's a lot of complexities when we talk about the interoperability of digital assets, and that's going to be a pretty big topic in itself. Now, artificial intelligence. This is, generally speaking, is not really talked about a lot when we talk about the metaverses, but this, again, Dr. Ozair touched upon this too, but this is actually a double-edged sword here. So, sorry, going back here. So the artificial intelligence is actually a double-edged sword here, because on the one hand, artificial intelligence comes in very handy in terms of creating more bots and creating interactive NPCs, which are non-playable characters. That's how a lot of virtual worlds and gaming engines actually enhance the user experience when they have other characters in there. But at the same time, with the GAN networks and with the deepfakes, AI is actually bound to be one of the biggest dangers. Like if with the unbound and unethical use of AI, that's actually one of the biggest concerns a lot of people on the who are on the guard in terms of how things going to go in the metaverse. That's what they're looking at. I'm going to go on here, try to cut down a little on my details. So another big thing that comes in here is basically the whole concept of that and the whole debate in terms of centralized versus decentralized. So I'm not really going to go into each and every detail here, but at the high level, whenever we talk about the centralized and decentralized, this is where this becomes a very contentious topic, because on the one hand, there's a lot of functionalities and features you actually get from the use of blockchain and the decentralized frameworks and the decentralized processes. Just to name a few, SSI is, yes, technically speaking, you can attain self-sovereign identity without the use of blockchain, but blockchains lend a very big helping hand to the use of SSIs and other features here. Now, why is that important? Because unless we have self-sovereign identity, you will have to somehow lean on some sort of a central authority to basically have identity like an authentication be implemented in the metaverse, and that's not something, as a decentralized thing, that's not something where we want to be, because then essentially you end up giving all the control to some central authorities. So that's where Web3, or I should really say blockchain, comes in and it becomes an important part of implementing SSI features. Now, NFTs, in fact, I'm going to touch upon this in a moment. Obviously, we all know about NFTs and non-fungible tokens, but leaving aside all the hype about the NFTs and all the negatives and everything else, but basically NFTs do provide you the digital provenance for the underlying asset, and that's where this becomes a very key feature. So if you think about the NFTs, in fact, I'm going to have another slide on this in a second. I think I should probably just go down here for a sec. So the different kind of NFTs, as we all understand that, there's art, collectibles, and in fact, you can think about this, that if you're in a virtual world, pretty much everything that you deal with is going to be some sort of a digital asset, whether that's art, whether that's your avatar, whether that's the digital land which you own in the metaverse. But the ownership of that specific asset is going to be proven in a way by the NFTs, and also the provenance of the ownership as to who exactly owned it, whether that's a single ownership record, that's really going to be proven by the NFTs. So that's where the NFTs actually become useful, but not necessarily in the current way they're being used in the hype, not necessarily by imposing artificial scarcity, but by making use of the actual ownership record on chain. Now, I'm going to have to come back on this for a second, and then we're going to go into more details of that. So obviously then we have DAOs, which is the decentralized autonomous organizations. Now this is something which gives you community ownership. Again, given the time today, we're not going to go into details of this today, but we're going to talk about this in more details in the upcoming sessions. dApps, which are decentralized applications. These are the applications which are running on blockchain, and they allow open source and openly audited source code to be running processes and applications where you don't really have to depend on a given company or a given a developer, basically to just be bound to their specific application. And the application is openly running and is basically, in a way, is unbiased and it's open to everybody at once for everybody the same way. And of course, we have decentralized finance, which removes the dependency on central or government institutes, but of course, then it adds much higher risk because of the removal of the intermediaries. I'm going to move into the next session here. Just keeping an eye on the questions and timing. Please do let me know if there's any specific questions here, but I'm going to just keep moving on here as a specific example. So let's talk about the specific example here. So we spoke about the NFT. So I'm going to take a specific example here. So obviously, I guess everybody knows about the BYC or the Bored Ape Yacht Club. So let me take an example here. So let's say if you actually owned one of these assets, again, forgetting about the hype here, forgetting about everything else, but the way you can think about this is that if you own a digital asset in the metaverse, the way the underlying use of blockchain becomes important here is because a given asset can be proven based on the contract address here. You know exactly who's the owner, and of course, in this case, there's a name assigned to this because of the DNS system or the naming system on Ethereum. However, like Dr. Ozair also referred to, the ownership and the ownership data here is pseudonymous. Basically, you may be able to see what is the contract address or what is the ownership address, but you may not be able to, unless you have some other related information, you may not be able to see exactly who owns that. However, as long as you can somehow cryptographically prove who's the owner of this, there's an immutable and an indisputable proof as to who owns this given asset and what exactly is the full history of this ownership, and what kind of token is this, and what data is, and all this kind of things. And of course, in this specific example here, you see the price of this thing. You can see the token standard. In this case, it happens to be ERC 721. Again, more details on this later, and which marketplaces this specific asset is available on. I'm going to go further down here. I'm going to actually skim through this here, but the reason this becomes important is because when we talk about the underlying blockchains which are hosting the ownership information, it's important to understand that there's not only one kind of blockchain, there's multiple kind of blockchains, but primarily there are two categories. There's permission blockchains and permissionless blockchains. So obviously Ethereum and then Solana, Cardano, all these guys, they fall under the permissionless, where anybody can basically just start using them. They don't need permission from anybody else. But the permission ones, of course, Hyperledger, Coda, and a bunch of other ones, they fall under the permission ones. So one of the big debates which is going on in the Metaverse universe is whether it should be running, or what kind of assets should be on the permissionless blockchain and what kind of assets should be on the permission blockchains, because there are pros and cons in both sides. In general, as a thumb rule, anything permissionless is going to be, generally speaking, slower, and obviously more open data. You have no way to basically hide data here because everything is up on the chain. In permission blockchains, there's different shades of data openness, and you can basically hide some specific kind of data. You can have different kind of channels which can hide data, and you can assign rights to who can see what kind of data. So there's an ongoing debate as to where the data should be in and how much data should be on which kind of chain. Going to come to one of the last important aspects here. So whenever we talk about the blockchains and the data, I find this thing to be a very important aspect here, that we need to look into the blockchain trilemma, which I believe have all heard about, of the blockchain trilemma of decentralization, security, and performance versus scalability. And also something which we probably generally outside the technology circles wouldn't really talk too much about is the data triad of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And it's a critical aspect that whenever we talk about the data in Metaverse or on blockchains, we try to balance these two aspects together. And let me explain this with a couple of quick examples here. So whenever we talk about the trilemma on the blockchain side, I guess anybody who has been studying blockchains or looking into this aspect, they understand that you have like any data on the blockchain. Of course, there's a whole concept of decentralization. The whole point about the blockchains is that you need to have decentralization. You cannot have centralized authorities or entities owning the data and having entire ownership of the processes of the data. But on the other hand, if you have decentralized processes, you have the whole idea. In fact, let me please go back to this, that when Dr. Ozair just mentioned that, think about the blockchain as a distributed ledger. So essentially, when we talk about a blockchain being a distributed ledger, essentially it's a database where everybody who's a participant has a copy of that ledger or the database. But if you have 100 people who have a copy of the database or the ledger, how do you really prove who has the right copy? And that's where the consensus mechanisms come in, and then that introduces the scalability issue, because the in order to achieve consensus between the participants, you need to have all the participants or the majority of participants have some kind of consensus, and if you have really a wide open network, it becomes very hard to achieve scalability. And of course, if you reduce scalability, if you only have very few people doing the consensus, that's where you would introduce a security risk. Prime example being Axie Infinity. I'll again share some examples in maybe after this call, but like if you reduce the number of people who are participating in consensus, then your system gets compromised and you have a very high attack risk. That's exactly what happened in the case of Axie Infinity just a couple of months ago. So how does that relate into confidential integrity and availability here? Because anybody who has worked with data knows very well that even if you're just working in a single environment, achieving confidentiality of the data and the integrity, which means the data is secure and is fully proven to be completed and is available when we need it at scale, that becomes a challenge even if you're just running a single organization. Now think about this: if you have to have data in a distributed and decentralized environment. So with those thoughts, I'm gonna wrap up my points here, but this is what we're gonna dive in more details in our subsequent sessions, and we are gonna have more questions coming up. So let me see if there's any open questions at this point.
Thank you.
And,
Thank you, Sandy. Thank you, Sandy. I think there are some questions. Tainisa, would you read the questions?
Absolutely, Dr. Imdad. So the first question was basically asking, can you send the slides to the audience? They would like to see your presentation.
Well, absolutely. So, well, I think we'll compile these slides together and share with everybody after the webinar. Yes.
And then the next question is, what are the opportunities for students in your organization and in the metaverse?
I can take that on very briefly, but I think Dr. Ozair can actually also definitely chime in on that. But let me just give a very quick 30-second answer on that. So basically, I think one of the things we're trying to bring in as part of this session of webinars is, or series of webinars, is to highlight that there are multiple areas and multiple disciplines within the metaverse, and so with all those multiple disciplines, there's a lot of opportunities for anybody who's interested in basically being a participant in the metaverse economy. So whether that's in the graphical side or whether it's in the being a blockchain programmer or just even in the fintech side of it. But let me hand this over to Dr. Ozair to add some more color to that.
I don't really have much to add. I mean, all what I'm saying is that, the metaverse, as I said, it's not a concrete concept right now. It's not a concrete reality right now. But there are a lot of jobs out there that kind of leading towards that, whether it's development, whether it's business development, whether it's programming and all of that I've seen that are now, trying to put things together. That's how you have to think about the metaverse at the moment. There's no jobs per se for the metaverse. It's just maybe things that are leading towards that, and this is how you have to think about it. And whether it's in the blockchain space or the NFT space or the DeFi space, and the business, as I said, business development, you can find jobs that are relating to that, because as we progress and develop, we need people to help us think about all this development.
I think one quick comment is many of the companies that are in the forefront of technology, for instance, Accenture, is one of those such companies, and they have something like 250 proof of concept projects they have developed in that area. Over 600 patents have been registered in the areas of related to metaverse. And in terms of use cases and in terms of applications, advertising is a prime area where companies are taking advantage of that, including Meta is using that. You can see some of that already being pushed to the users. And in universities are getting into that area. As Sandy pointed out earlier, there are some universities, for instance, are offering their courses, some in Japan, some in the US. They're offering their programs in the metaverse. So change is happening. A lot of things are coming this way in the technology arena. And people are really being innovative, and they use their imagination. So with that, I know that we're past our 1 o'clock time frame. Many people expected this to be more detailed, but unfortunately, in the limited time that we have, we can address and touch the surface, so to speak. In the future sessions, we go a little bit deeper. We discuss a lot more topics and issues, but I wanted to thank the panel, outstanding panel that we had today. And also I want to thank Hyperledger for their support and connecting us with the community. That has been phenomenal for us. And of course, our Ripple sponsor that they have been the Genesis sponsor for the FinTech Center, and we want to thank him as well. We're in a new era of digital change, and so I want to invite you to start the journey where change, imagination, and opportunity meet. Until next time, thank you. Be well. See you in the next session.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Imdad and Tanise, and of course,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Ozair.
Thank
Nice
you,
to meet you.
everyone. Have a great